In a small village in Africa, there lived a man named Mr. Edward. He was a strange man, always quiet and secretive. People in the village didn't know much about him, but they didn't trust him. Mr. Edward was known to keep to himself, living alone in a small house at the edge of the village. But Mr. Edward had a dark secret. He would take pictures of young girls in the village, pictures that they never knew he was taking. He would trick them into sending him more photos of themselves. Some girls were too shy to talk about it, while others didn't understand what he was doing at first. Once he had these private pictures, he would use them to blackmail the girls. Mr. Edward would tell them, "If you don't do what I want, I will send these pictures to everyone in the village and online. You will be embarrassed, and your family will be ashamed." The girls, too afraid of what would happen, had no choice but to listen to him. They did things they didn't want to do, all because they feared what Mr. Edward could do with their pictures. Among these girls were Amina and Fatimah. Amina was quiet and shy, while Fatimah was a bit more confident, but both were terrified of Mr. Edward. One day they met by accident and started talking about their experiences. They were both shocked to learn that Mr. Edward had done the same thing to each of them. He had blackmailed both of them into doing things they never wanted to do. They soon realized that they weren't the only ones. There were other girls in the village who had been hurt by Mr. Edward, and it made them angry. They knew they had to stop him, but they didn't know how. They couldn't go to the police because they were too scared that no one would believe them. One night, Amina and Fatimah made a decision. They knew they had to take action. They had to stop Mr. Edward from hurting anyone else. They planned to go to his house, confront him, and make him pay for what he had done. That night, under the cover of darkness, Amina and Fatimah went to Mr. Edward's house. They were nervous, but their anger gave them strength. They snuck inside, and when they found him alone, they told him they knew about his secret. But Mr. Edward just laughed at them and threatened to send their pictures out to the world if they tried to tell anyone. In the heat of the moment, things got out of control. The girls were so angry, so scared, and so hurt by everything Mr. Edward had done that they ended up killing him. They didn't mean for it to happen, but in that moment, it felt like the only way to stop him. Afterward, Amina and Fatimah ran away. They knew they had done something terrible, but they also knew they had stopped a monster. They didn't know what to do next, so they just waited. The next morning, Mr. Edward's body was found in his house. The village was shocked. The police began investigating, but they didn't know who had done it. Slowly, the truth started to come out. The villagers began to whisper, and they soon realized that Amina and Fatimah were the ones who had killed Mr. Edward. The community was divided. Some people were angry that the girls had taken the law into their own hands, but many others understood why they did it. They knew about the terrible things Mr. Edward had done to the girls, and they felt sympathy for Amina and Fatimah. They had been forced to live through something horrible, and they had finally stopped the man who had hurt so many others. But the police didn't care about what the community thought. They arrested Amina and Fatimah for killing Mr. Edward. The village leaders tried to talk to the police, explaining that the girls had done it out of desperation, but the law had to be followed. Even though the village supported the girls, Amina and Fatimah were taken to jail. The village would never forget what happened, and the story of Mr. Edward would be remembered as a lesson about what can happen when people are afraid to speak up. In the end, the court decided the fate of the girls. Some people still believed they did the right thing, while others believed they had gone too far. But one thing was clear: the story of Mr. Edward would never be forgotten, and the village learned that sometimes even the strongest people can be broken by fear and darkness.